Today's topic before us is the advent of Swami Vivekananda on the American scene. Now, to understand the message which Swamiji gave in 1893 to the Western world, we have to keep in mind two important factors. One, what were the factors which formulated Swamiji's message? I mean, the intellectual climate, the philosophical climate under which he grew up, the values that he imbibed, and the formative influences that determined Swamiji's style of interpretation of the ancient wisdom of Vedanta when he delivered to the Western world. These are certain important factors that you have to keep in mind. On the other hand, we should also know, we should keep in mind the intellectual climate that prevailed in America, in Western world in general, during the last decade of 19th century. Now, Sister Nivedita says there were three formative influences that defined Swamiji's message. In her own language, she puts it this way: Guru, Shastram, and Motherland. By Guru, she means Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. The spiritual training, the intensive spiritual training that Swamiji received from his master, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, from 1881 till the August of 1886. During this long period of 5 years, Swamiji was led step by step towards the highest peak of spiritual realization by Sri Ramakrishna, who represented the condensed form of 5,000 years of India's spiritual evolution. So Swamiji had this background of intuitive experience of everything that he preached and talked and wrote about during his 9 years of life from 1893 till 1902. And this experience he got from Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, from his Guru. So this is the most important factor, the primary factor that enabled Swamiji to give to the Western world a spiritual message which enabled the Christians to go deeper into the essence of Christian spiritual tradition, and which enables the unbelievers to investigate the truths behind the phenomenon we call religion with a new curiosity. So this is one important factor, this experience. The second factor was his own first-hand experience of India's civilization and culture during his what we call Parivrajaka days, during his wandering period. Swamiji traveled all across length and width of India. And he was really puzzled and surprised and sometimes shocked to see the contrast between the spiritual tradition of this ancient country on the one hand and the prevailing conditions of India on the other. Swamiji's education had enabled him to understand the heritage of India. Incidentally, I would tell you, and this is a very important factor to keep in mind, it is said that India had altogether a period of 19th century, 1,900 years of what we normally call golden era. To understand this point, for example, America had this golden era during the post-Second World War period. America became the most important politically, economically, even militarily, scientifically and technologically, the most advanced nation in the world. Britain had its golden era during the Victorian period, at least from 1820s onwards, and also for some time during the period of Queen Elizabeth. France had its golden era during the period of Louis XIV. So also Spain before the Spanish Armada. Even small countries like Portugal had its golden era. Rome had its golden era, almost for 600 years, when Rome was the most paramount economic, military, and in a political superpower in the world. India had, according to great historians like Toynbee, Durand, and others, had altogether a period of 1,900 years, divided into 3 periods. I'm just giving an example. Right from the days of this 8th century BC till 2nd century, 3rd century AD, and also a number of other intervals. So I'm just giving an example because Swamiji was aware of all this. The nation which produced Buddha, Shankara, and so on. And now what did he find in front of him? A nation which had become economically backward, socially divisive, quarrelsome, and a nation in which the educated people felt ashamed of their own national heritage, which is a kind of suicidal condition for any nation or society. So he was shocked, surprised. So his intense patriotism, his zeal to bring India to its past glory, that was the second factor. The third factor is very relevant from our point of view, from the standpoint of the topic that we are going to deal with right now. The third factor was his education, his Eastern and Western education. Swamiji had occasion to study Sanskrit, and he had the occasion to study many of the original Sanskrit works. But that is not very relevant from our point of view. The most relevant point from our point of view was Swamiji's exposure to modern education. That is very relevant in understanding the real significance of the message that he delivered to the Western world. You have to remember Swamiji, the year in which he was born, 1863. By the time the works of Marx and Engels had become, to some extent, fashionable topics of conversation in many drawing rooms of the elite people, especially in a city like Calcutta, which was the capital of the British Empire. And after London, it was the most important city in British Empire during that period. And Darwin's Origin of Species. And also the new intellectual movements which were sweeping the European countries, European continent, which were questioning the very existence or the relevance of what we normally call spirituality and religion. So all these factors played very important roles in formulating Swamiji's message, which he delivered to the Western world. And much more important that 3 reform movements which had become very popular in in India during his time, played their role in formulating the message which Swamiji gave to the Western world. The first one was Brahma Samaj, of which he himself was a member, which was founded in 1828 by Rajaram Mohan Roy. 8 years before English education was introduced in India. Now, this Brahma Samaj had become a very popular movement in the city where he grew up. And all the educated people of the city were preaching some kind of religion which was neither Hinduism nor Christianity. It was a kind of hybrid phenomenon. It was very close to Unitarian teachings. That's why you find many of the symbols of the Brahma Samaj had close resemblance with the Unitarian symbols. The teachings were also very close to Unitarian teachings. And many of the great leaders of Brahma Samaj were pioneers in Christological studies in India. In fact, they contributed a great towards the, what Christian elite in India called the indigenization or Indianization of Christology in India. For example, Kesar Chandra Sen, who was perhaps the most prominent intellectual of Calcutta city, whose lectures he himself used to listen to. He was the one who gave a revolutionary interpretation to Holy Trinity. He interpreted Holy Trinity as Satchidananda. Father, Son and Holy Ghost, he interpreted in terms of Satchidananda, the Upanishadic Vedantic dictum. Kalicharan Banerjee, Brahmabandhu Upadhyaya, and of course Keshav Chandra Sen, and many others. So they were trying to reform Hinduism, but in the process they were on the verge of Christianizing Hinduism. A kind of Christianized pantheism was what they were preaching from the pulpits in Brahma Samaj temples. And Swamiji was listening to all these lectures. Brahma Samaj played a very important role, directly and indirectly, in formulating Swamiji's views on religion and spirituality. So that is one thing, that's one point. Second movement was Arya Samaj. If Brahma Samaj was some kind of a neo-pseudo Vedantic movement, Arya Samaj was an extremely conservative orthodox movement which tried to interpret Hinduism, Vedanta, in terms of the old conservative ritualism, which even Buddha had questioned and tried to drive away from the body politic of Vedic tradition, but not always succeeded. So its founder, Dayananda Saraswati, was a great monk, a very learned, very traditional, but very conservative monk who founded Arya Samaj in 1875. The year in which Theosophical movement was formed in New York by Colonel Olcott, Blavatsky and others. So this Arya Samaj also caught his attention when he was a college student and simultaneously visiting the Dakshineswar temple to sit at the feet of Sri Ramakrishna to learn the fundamental lessons of spiritual experience. The third movement, which I already mentioned, is this Theosophical movement, which was a kind of occult movement, which did not attract him very much. So these three movements played very important roles in formulating Swamiji's approach towards Vedanta philosophy, which later on he gave to the Western world. And what was the Western world which received this message? You know, to understand the intellectual climate of America in 1893, we had to start with the 8th century pre-Socratic philosopher Thales. The great contributions of Plato were completely forgotten during the Middle Ages. The one solid attempt to give religion and mysticism a respectable place in philosophical speculation was made by Plotinus. He was a great Neoplatonist philosopher who lived between maybe 260 to 320 AD. But after the period of Philo and Plotinus, who were the prominent Neoplatonists, philosophy practically was strangled to death by theology in European philosophical tradition. So the old golden era of Greek thought was forgotten, and Augustine, because of his Alexandrian connection, tried to give a respectable place to mysticism. His teachings were also completely rejected by modern monastic orders like the order of St. Francis, who was great, certainly a great lover of God and mystic, but the Franciscan order considered any attempt to spiritually realize the truths of theology as a kind of Neoplatonism. Example is this Master Eckhart, who was more of a Dominican than Franciscan, was persecuted by the Bishop of Cologne, who was a Franciscan. And his death is still a mystery. Nobody knew what really happened to him. If you read the works of Eckhart, you'll be surprised how close he comes to Shankaracharya. For example, God is beyond definition. Vacham agochiratvat. Ito vajo nivartante. All these great Upanishadic statements. Shankaracharya vacham agochiratvat. Say, reality is beyond the vision of eyes. Beyond the eyes of words. Means the reality is beyond definition. The supreme spiritual reality is a matter of inner intuitive experience of the immanent reality within, and also the experience of the same reality as the all-pervading reality outside. It is beyond words, beyond definition, beyond books. These ideas were so strongly put in words by and preached and taught by Eckhart, but Eckhart even had to face a mysterious death. We don't know what really happened to him. On his way to Rome to explain his theological position, he just vanished. So, philosophy was practically strangled by theology, and it almost vanished. I can just quote one word from Augustine, who actually had a transcendental vision of the supreme spiritual reality. Augustine writes, "The very thing which is now called a Christian religion never failed from beginning of human race up to the coming of Christ in flesh. Then the true religion which already existed began to be called Christianity." See, Augustine says what Jesus taught already existed before he was born. It's an eternal religion. Universal, eternal, spiritual truth, which doesn't begin with an individual, either Rama, Krishna, Shankara, Christ, or anyone. Eternal truth is eternal. These great teachers, Buddha, Christ, all these great teachers, they just give a new contemporary interpretation to give a new life to these eternal spiritual ideas. This idea was formulated by no less a theologian than Augustine, but that was because he had the influence of Neoplatonism on his writings and also on his sermons. I'm just giving an example. Now, what really happened? This tyranny of theology, the tyranny of the revealed books, this surrender of reason to faith this division of humanity into groups of believers and unbelievers. Believers heading towards heaven and non-believers heading towards hell. This was questioned by later philosophical movements and thinkers from 18th century onwards. It began with British empiricism, Locke, Hume and others, and German idealists like Kant, and later on even by the great political, socio-economic thinkers like Marx and Engels, and also modern scientists by Darwin. All of them questioned the tyranny of theology over philosophy. Philosophy is an attempt to uncover the truth. Swamiji's greatness was when he preached Vedanta in America, he indirectly effected a reconciliation, a synthesis of philosophy, theology and mysticism. This is perhaps not very well noticed by others, but if you look at Swamiji's message from the standpoint of evolution of world thought, you will understand Swamiji was in fact effecting a synthesis of religion, theology, philosophy, and that strange spiritual phenomenon that we call mysticism. Mysticism was it was totally unacceptable to theologians. Philosophy also was unacceptable. Logic and reason were also unacceptable. So that's why 19th century Western intellectuals tried to portray religion as anti-humanistic. And Swamiji said religion interpreted as spirituality is the greatest greatest humanistic philosophy. See, the human being is the Taj Mahal of temples. The best service the best worship you can give to God is the service done to human beings living next door to you. These statements, in fact, humanism cannot go beyond this. So Swamiji said, far from being anti-humanistic, religion, not interpreted as dogma or doctrine, but defined as experience of the immanent reality within and experience of the omnipresent reality without, is the greatest humanistic thought system that world can think of. So he called it universal spiritual humanism. It is universal. It is not radical humanism or scientific humanism or any such humanism. It is a universal spiritual humanism, because this humanism is built upon the foundation that human beings constitute one single spiritual family. You may belong to any religion, or you may belong to no religion. You may be a total unbeliever. Still, you have a place in God's empire. God doesn't want that you should worship Him. His existence doesn't depend upon your recognition that He is God. Such a God, I don't think that such a God is worthy of much respect. A God who says, please respect me, please accept me, otherwise my own existence is at stake. But Swamiji said, God is accessible even to non-believers. So, even a Marx and Engels could not question the religion interpreted by Swami Vivekananda as realization of the divinity already within. So, Marx and Engels, who were shaking the foundations of established organized religions in the 19th century, got a religion, had to listen to a religion interpreted as spirituality, which they could not challenge. So also Darwin. If you are talking about a God who sat on a chair on one fine morning, created this world 6,500 years back, then you are limiting God within the confines of time, space and causation. So Swamiji said, this world that you see is nothing but the vision of the absolute reality seen through the prism of time, space and causation. You look at this world without associating it with time, space and causation, then it is the eternal reality. And that eternal reality is the real God. God which is the immanent reality residing in all living beings, not only human beings, of the animal kingdom. The entire creation is an expression of this immanent reality. That is what he meant when he said the difference between an amoeba and a Buddha is one of degrees, not of kind. In amoeba, this spiritual reality is manifesting at a very low level. In a Buddha, the enlightened one, it is manifesting in its full splendor. So what really happened? Religion, which was facing challenges from scientists who said that a religion which cannot prove its validity in the laboratory of modern science has no place in modern man's intellectual horizon. That religion was repudiated by Swamiji, who said the religion is not a matter of dogma or faith. It's a matter of intuitive experience, which even a God-negating scientist can experience within him. It doesn't depend upon belief in a book, in a priest, or a place of worship, or reading a holy book. Religion, interpreted as spirituality, goes beyond all this. So the humanist got a religion which was interpreted as the most sublime form of humanism, based on the immanent reality of the all-pervading spirit. And scientists got a religion which is interpreted as scientific as science itself. One of Swamiji's revolutionary contributions was his interpretation of religion as a science of inward inquiry. Just as we make inquiry in the external world and nature is forced to reveal its secrets, so also if we make an inquiry in the internal world, then we will realize the immanent reality within. I have to remind you about one important point. Whatever Swamiji preached here, he got from the Upanishads. He himself said, I preach nothing but the Upanishads. We should not get away with the impression that what Swamiji gave to Western world was his own formulation or his own creation, his own discovery. See, Kantism is after all, the credit goes to Kant. Utilitarianism, the credit goes to Bentham, Mill and others. Similarly, many intellectuals may get away with the impression, Vedanta in America, it is Swami Vivekananda's creation. No, that was the first thing that Swamiji always disclaimed. He said, whatever he preached here, he preached only the Upanishads. He got from the Upanishads, which were interpreted by the great teachers of ancient times, like Shankaracharya and others. So it's an eternal truth. Not that it is told by a person. The person gets his authority because he gets this truth from this eternal experience. It's the experience which gives authority to the preacher and the speaker. That was Swamiji's interpretation. Now, what I want to tell you was this. So when Swamiji came here, he brought this eternal message. And from the standpoint of the influences of the three reform movements on Swamiji's interpretation and style, I have to speak a few more words. I said earlier, the Brahma Samaj was an attempt, rather a misdirected attempt to interpret Vedanta just by borrowing ideas, artificially borrowing ideas from other traditions without giving any importance to experience. And Theosophical movement, it was certainly a great movement, and Annie Besant was certainly an outstanding personality of of that age. But there again, it believed in some kind of occultism, which a modern rationalist or a humanist can never accept. Especially the educated Western world, which has seen enough of occultism, burning at stake, inquisition, crusades for centuries, will never be willing to accept a kind of religious tradition based on occult faith. Because Western mind accepts something which may go beyond reason and logic, but should not go against reason and logic. And that was exactly what Swamiji preached. Swamiji's interpretation of Vedanta goes beyond reason and logic, but doesn't go contrary to reason and logic. Here again, I must remind you what Swamiji preached, he got from the traditional Upanishads. In the Upanishad Bhashya, Shankaracharya says, Srutya Yuktya Swanubhutya. Sruti means revealed text. You may accept revealed books, theological works, but you must use your reason. So, Yukti means logic, reasoning. You have full right to make proper use of your own logic, your own intelligence, your own intellect, your own reasoning power. But that is not enough. It must become your own experience. Swa Anubhutya means one's own intuitive inner experience of the truths that we read about in holy books. So this is acceptable not only to believers but even to non-believers. So Swamiji's interpretation of religion was acceptable not only to theists but even to atheists. As I said earlier, many great seekers of truth who belong to different dispensations of Christian tradition got a deeper understanding of their own sacred, holy, traditional faith system by listening to Swamiji. And many who were rejecting God because they can't see God in front of them. Swamiji, in one context, he said, why do you reject God? Because you don't see him. Now, to reject a God whom you don't see is as illogical as to accept him even though you don't see him. God doesn't appear before you, so you reject him. Now, you are no more logical, no more reasonable than the person who blindly believes in a God whom he doesn't see. So, disbelief without experience is as irrational as belief or faith without experience. So many non-believers were willing to start a new inquiry towards the truth that we normally call spirituality or religion. Now, another great contribution of Swamiji was this. See, it seems that he was highly impressed by certain characteristics that were found in American tradition, which perhaps could not be found in European national cultures. See, European cultures are very deep. At least they can boast of several centuries of cultural tradition. They are being practicing certain cultural values, national values, social values for centuries. So, though they were shaken in their faith in a religious system which was responsible for the crusades and several massacres in the name of God and on behalf of religion, still they were not willing to accept Swamiji's new ideas the way an average American was willing to accept. That's because there is something special about the American cultural tradition. This nation itself originated as a land of migrants. Probably it originated with the arrival of a group of people who wanted the freedom to worship God according to their own views and their own traditions. So naturally, they were willing to accept people coming from all over the world who were coming in search of freedom to practice their own cultural, social, or religious values. So they were willing to accept new ideas coming from anywhere in the world in a way that a European nation or people may not be willing to accept because of their deeper conservative roots. And again, Swamiji's contribution, Swamiji's advent should be understood in the light of three contemporary attitudes towards other religious traditions which are current in Western Hemisphere, especially in America. The first one is the kind of defensive attitude, which is highly exclusivistic. When Eastern religious traditions, mystical traditions became popular, or started becoming popular, there was an attempt on the part of many fundamentalist dispensations to become defensive, to become more and more exclusivistic, on the ground of the assumed superiority towards Asiatic values. But that was very much present in the early decades of 19th century and even during the later decades of 19th century. And even today you can find that attitude very much prevalent in certain parts of the country. The second attitude is syncretic, and that is still much more dangerous. There are many people who are disgusted with the current religious traditions, with the God from European tradition. They give up everything and they are willing to accept whatever comes from the East, not necessarily very genuine spiritual tradition. So a kind of complete surrender is called a syncretic. Anything that comes from the East, some kind of meditation, a technique or anything, we just got some aura about it, something glamorous about it. They accept and practice, and of course they reject, very soon they will reject it. This is the second attitude. It was prevalent in 19th century also, but it's much more prevalent during our own times. It is not a very creative, not a constructive approach towards religious integration. The third approach is much more constructive and creative, that is dialogical. We can take good, noble ideas from all religious traditions. In fact, this approach begins with Swamiji's advent in America. Because Swamiji's lectures and ideas made many genuine seekers belonging to Christian tradition to have a fresh look at the teachings of Jesus, and they found they got new insights into the teachings of their own religious tradition. Swamiji did not reject any religious tradition. He asked, a Christian can be a better Christian. A Hindu can be a better Hindu. A Buddhist can be a better Buddhist if they accept Vedantic doctrines. Because in that respect, Vedanta doesn't belong to any national or religious tradition. Either you have to admit that it belongs to all religious traditions, or it doesn't belong to any religious tradition. It is essentially universal. The idea that you have to experience the immanent reality residing in all of us is universal. It is not acceptable just to believers only. It becomes acceptable even to non-believers, even to non-conformists. So he didn't reject any religious tradition, and he never allowed anyone to convert his faith and become a Vedanti. There is no such thing as conversion to Vedantism. Vedantism or Vedantic outlook means accepting or taking a new broad-minded universal outlook towards our own religious tradition. That is the real acceptance of, that is the real approach towards Vedantic teachings. And this attitude became popular after Swamiji's advent. Because as you know, if you look at the intellectual climate in America during the 19th century, they got their ideas about Hinduism or Asian religious traditions only from missionaries who were certainly not very friendly. I will tell you an interesting incident, and it's a very important thing to remember. In Indian history, there were two trends in Western attitude towards Hindu religion. When the British established their rule in Bengal, the first Governor General, Warren Hastings, who was a member of the British nobility, was one of the peers, one of the barons. He was very much appreciative of Hindu religious values and traditions. He was the one who encouraged one British employee, Charles Wilkins perhaps, to translate Gita into English. The first complete translation of Gita into English. And remind you, he was encouraged to do this by Warren Hastings, who was the first Governor General of Bengal. Bengal of those days included today's Bangladesh, Bihar, parts of Orissa, and also West Bengal. It's a huge province. Now, for the next 40 years, there was a flow of Englishmen, well-educated Englishmen, coming to India, who were highly inspired, who were highly attracted towards India's ancient spiritual tradition. But from 1830s onwards, 1830s and 40s onwards, a new trend began to evolve. Anglican Church objected to the efforts made by the East India Company in publishing books of ancient tradition, ancient Hindu religious tradition. So they began to indoctrinate new British officers coming to India, and they wanted them to work and help the Anglican missionaries in converting Hindus into Christianity. That is the beginning of a new trend, and in fact that actually resulted in the great independence struggle which is known as Sipahi Mutiny in 1857. After that India became the British Crown took over the administration of India in 1857 at the end of the Sipahi Mutiny. So what I mean to say is, there was always an attempt on the part of many noble-minded Western intellectuals to study and to take inspiration from India's Vedantic tradition. But when Swamiji came, he gave an altogether new interpretation. He did not preach what we normally understand Hindu religion. He preached the universal message of Vedanta, which according to him is the finest fruit of Hindu religious evolution. In one of his sentences, in one context, he said, from the highest flights of Vedantic philosophy to the lowest fetishism, the agnosticism of the Buddhists, the atheism of the Jains, each and all have a place in Hindu religion. In this sentence, Swamiji defines Vedanta as the finest fruit of Hindu religious evolution. But in fact, according to him, it goes beyond all religions, including Hinduism. In the sense, it is universal in its essence, it is universal in its teachings and also application. It was this message which actually was responsible for the beginning of a new era of acceptance. Not only tolerance, of acceptance of other religious traditions in Western Hemisphere. It is called a dialogical attitude. We can interact with people belonging to different religious traditions because each religion is an equally valid path leading to the supreme goal. One can choose one's own path. But there are certain factors to be kept in mind. One should be sincere, honest, truthful, pure, and so on. All these are human faculties. These qualities can be found even among the non-believers. You can find all these great qualities: purity of mind, honesty, sincerity. You can find these qualities not only in theists and believers, but also in non-believers. Because one can be spiritual without being religious. It's a new revolutionary idea. Again, when I say from the Western point of view, it is a revolutionary idea. Because all the criticisms of established religions was based on the fact that the religion was interpreted as dogma and doctrine. A matter of faith. You proclaim your faith, then you are religious. Without any reference to your own inner experience or anything. But Swamiji said, no, religion is a matter of experience and not a matter of faith, dogma, or proclamation of one's own faith system. So in that respect, one can be spiritual without being religious. All religious men are not necessarily spiritual, and all spiritual men are not necessarily religious. I can give an example. Gandhiji was supposed to be a great believer in Hindu religion. And Gandhiji, if you read his life, he participated in many social movements, in fact, to help the untouchables and low-caste Hindus to gain entry into temples. They were not allowed to enter temples during those days. And Gandhiji would go to certain famous temples and start an agitation there. For what? He wanted to pursue the authorities of the temple to make a proclamation allowing all people to enter and worship in the temples. But Gandhi himself very rarely went to the temple and did any worship there. But he was accepted as an ideal Hindu by all great people. And this Gandhi was himself inspired by Swami Vivekananda. So this is a new revolutionary idea. One can be spiritual without being religious. And that was based on the fact that all religious people are not necessarily spiritual. And there is the possibility of everyone becoming spiritual through this intuitive experience without believing or non-believing necessarily in a dogma, doctrine, or anything. By leading a good life, one can realize the immanent reality within, and simultaneously one can realize the existence of the same immanent reality as the all-pervading, omnipresent reality outside. The former makes you a better human being, and later the realization of the same immanent reality as the all-pervading truth enables you to become a better human being, to be more broad-minded, to do better things, and to live a better life in this world. This was altogether a new revolutionary concept from the Western point of view, but as Swamiji used to remind all of us again and again, all these ideas he got from the teachings of the Upanishads. I have tried to give a brief outline of some of the ideas related to Swamiji's advent in America and the relevance of the teachings that he gave here within a very short time span. So thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om. That's Sri Rama Krishna.